I would like to dedicate this sermon this morning to Edith Chase, one of our ancestors here at Kent United Church of Christ, upon whose shoulders we stand as stewards of God's creation. September 1st, 1914. It was on this day the very last passenger pigeon died, right here in Ohio at the Cincinnati Zoo. That last passenger pigeon was a female named Martha. As extinctions go, the extinction of the passenger pigeon is truly a stupendous human achievement, unparalleled in recorded history. Thanks to our penchant for relentless killing combined with large-scale habitat destruction, these iconic birds' population crashed from billions to zero in just 50 short years. From billions to zero. That's hard for any of us to wrap our minds around, yet it happened, and we were responsible for it. Fast forward to 2018. Today we stand on the brink of losing legends of the wild, such as the orangutan, tigers, elephants, due to palm oil plantations and their irresponsible practices and rapid expansion. Palm oil is one of the most widely used vegetable oils, found in over half of the packaged products at our grocery stores, thanks to multinational corporations such as Nestle and PepsiCo. Does anyone else here like Nutella? That delicious chocolatey hazelnut spread. There's nothing quite like Nutella slathered on a good crunchy piece of toast. Yet Nutella is made from palm oil. And who doesn't love an Oreo? Or Ritz crackers? Or Skittles candies? These are only a very few of the myriad of products worldwide made from this problematic substance. Palm oil can now be considered a significant driver of rainforest destruction, species extinction, and climate pollution. And if we are not careful, we will be witnesses in our lifetime of the extinction of the Sumatran orangutan and other great creatures like the tiger and the elephant because of human actions and greed. Our actions and choices as consumers must be informed by our Christian faith and aligned with our Christian values. Just then a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And he said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" And he answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this, and you will live." To love God is to love what God has created. Right here in Portage County, we are on the verge of losing two different species of bats. A wetlands insect called Mitchell's satyr, and northern monkshood, a plant found on shaded cliff faces and wooded ravines near water seeps. Even our nation's symbol, the beloved and majestic bald eagle, is still under some protections here in the Buckeye State. And while many of us may never have heard of some of these species, whether animals or insects or plants, they are an integral part of our ecosystem. We share the air and the soil and the water. They are a part of our environment just as we are a part of theirs, even though we may not know each other very well. All of us, everyone, created by the genius of God. Most currently, the world lost our very last white rhino. It was during Holy Week, actually, a fitting time for us to grieve the death of Sudan, that was his name, the last male northern white rhino, who died in Kenya, well cared for by those who were devoted to his comfort. I recall preparing for our Good Friday service that day, only a few weeks ago now, and feeling unexpectedly distraught. A real sense of grief overcame me, the loss of this remarkable animal. As Frederic and I look forward to adopting a child, I couldn't help but think about all the creatures that would be no more once she arrives. How would we ever explain that just like the dinosaurs, there were once these awesome creatures called white rhinos roaming the earth? It's no different than describing members of our family that she will never meet. Frederic's father, Michel, or my stepmom, Sally, because they died before she entered the world. What a strange and sad feeling. The white rhino is now extinct due to human irresponsibility, the meat industry, agribusiness, colonialism, and just sheer greed. We passed by the white rhino, not tending to his needs, ignoring his suffering, leaving him for half dead until he is to be no more. But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" And Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers." We know the story. And at the end, Jesus says, "Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the one who suffered?" He said, "The one who showed mercy." "Go and do likewise," Jesus told him. We have forgotten to ask the question of all questions, foundational to our faith: and who is my neighbor? Long assuming that the earth and all its resources are ours for the taking, ours for the consuming, that they are here only for our human purposes. We have misinterpreted our own sacred texts to believe that we have been granted some sort of divine permission to dominate all other living creatures, rather than understanding and embracing God's trust in us to care for creation. We are not in a category all our own, free to determine and dictate what happens in the natural world. No, we are but one small part of all that mighty God has made, intended not to have power over other living things, but rather power with them, to share the one thing we all have in common: our planet. We need each other. We need the bats, the wetland plants, bees and birds and beasts. When even the tiniest creature is endangered and no longer playing its unique role, it throws our entire ecosystem out of balance. Are we communicating with our earth kin? Do we understand them as our neighbor? Are we in dialogue with them as those with whom we share this incredible planet and upon whom we depend for life as we know it? At times I fear that we as a human species have become so anthropocentric, meaning that we regard humankind as central or more important, especially as opposed to God or animals, that even our theological categories have become irrelevant. For what does it matter if we succeed in saving human life, in achieving social justice, in reconciling the races, if we are destroying our earth kin and the planet that gives us all life in the process? So on this Earth Day, this is about social justice. This is about living out our gospel call. On this Creation Care Sunday, we listen again to the ancient wisdom of the prophets of old, who are still speaking to us today. As Job reminded us this morning, ask the animals and they will teach you, and the birds of the air, they will tell you. Ask the plants of the earth and they will teach you, and the fish of the sea will declare to you. Who among all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In God's hand is the life of every living thing. Some scientists are calling the age we live in an ecological Armageddon. One theologian describes it as an eco-crucifixion. We have condemned our earth and our earth-kin to death, maybe not meaning to, but we have followed through by torturing and killing them by our consumer choices. Animals, plants, and trees, and as devastating as the loss of these elements and creatures is, it is our water that is most urgent. As Lynn and David explained, water covers almost 3/4 of our planet. Oceans can boast mountains taller than Mount Everest and canyons deeper than the Grand Canyon. 97% of all living matter on Earth is found in those waters, everything from microscopic organisms to the great blue whale. We should stand in awe of this natural wonder and sustainer of our lives, for it is impossible to even imagine life without water. What would we drink? What would we eat? For without water, there would be no plants, no trees, no crops, no animals, indeed no food. How would we bathe or clean? How would we baptize? How would we survive? Disturbingly, it is already true to say that hundreds of thousands on our planet are not surviving because of a lack of water. There is a new class of displaced peoples called climate refugees who flee not from political persecution or conflict, but because their lands, their ecosystems, and thus their livelihoods have been destroyed. While at the United Nations just a couple months ago, I heard far too many predictions, educated, informed, scientifically based predictions that water will be the cause of our next world war. In fact, the UN is convening worldwide forums on water so that governments and nations can equally agree on how to distribute the most precious resource of all of us. Will we as the human race allow ourselves to fight over the greatest source of life on the planet? And is it any wonder then that we must ask this question of all questions, foundational to our faith: who is our neighbor? Because I'm afraid that we have already begun to fight and our planet is fighting back. Water pollution caused by our personal choices, by improper land use and development planning, and agricultural runoff affects neighbors downstream who live near or depend on rivers and oceans for their livelihoods and health. Water ecosystems are severely threatened by our human operations. Without regard, we consume and dump into rivers what we no longer need. And this not only affects the life of our very own Cuyahoga River, which has the grand distinction of, one time in history, catching on fire, and our Great Lake Erie, but all our waters and the life forms within them. This in turn, everything we do to them and with those waters affects each of us. And thus, the more we disregard the dignity of God's creation and fail to recognize our waters as God's masterpieces, the less likely we will be to have them as a resource at all. As we have all witnessed, nature is simply not to be reckoned with. For not only does water give life, it takes life. The tsunamis of the past several decades have claimed thousands of lives. The series of hurricanes in Texas and Florida and the Caribbean, especially Haiti and Puerto Rico, dislocated and took the lives of far too many. The polluted water in many developing countries causes diseases that most never recover from. But our dominant American culture does not function like the cultures of our native indigenous peoples, who make decisions designed to endure for the next 7 generations. No, the idol of individualism worship in our culture attempts to debilitate our ability to see beyond ourselves and our own need for something outside ourselves to sustain us. So we ask ourselves again this morning, who is our neighbor, and how are we caring for that neighbor? As William Sloane Coffin, former pastor of Riverside Church, wrote, "In the Holy Land are 2 ancient bodies of water. Both are fed by the Jordan River. In one, fish play and roots find sustenance. In the other, there is no splash of fish, no sound of bird, no leaf around. The difference is not in the Jordan River, for it empties into both, but in the Sea of Galilee. For every drop taken in, one goes out. It gives and lives. The other gives nothing, and it is called the Dead Sea." For all that we take from the earth and our earth kin, what are we giving back? What we give depends on the source from which we have to give. Our rivers are drying up due to climate change. Our oceans may be the largest natural body on the earth, but they too have limitations. Water is a finite resource. So what then is our sustainable, unlimited source of life? And from what source do we find life-giving water? Well, of course, we are a resurrection people, sustained by the God who created us and all living things in this divine, eternal spring of water and life-giving force. And I invite all of us today to reaffirm our responsibility to care for our earth and all her inhabitants who are our neighbors. For Jesus is quite clear. Who is our neighbor? The one who showed mercy, the one who chooses to care. Are we stopping along the roadside to tend to that which is suffering? Are we stopping to care for one of the greatest resources in this town, the Cuyahoga River? Are we stopping to care for that which our town is named for, our trees? Are we simply passing by, hoping someone else will stop and take care of all that God has entrusted to us? And who is our neighbor? The white rhino. And who is our neighbor? The Sumatran orangutan. And who is our neighbor? The Indiana and the northern long-eared bat. And who is our neighbor? The trees. And who is our neighbor? The California condor. And who is our neighbor? The bald eagle. And who is our neighbor? Our black squirrels. And who is our neighbor? The Cuyahoga Valley National Park. And who is our neighbor? The great blue heron. And who is our neighbor? Great Lake Erie. And who is our neighbor? The Kent Bog. And who is our neighbor? Our precious, precious Cuyahoga River. If all that was created by God, then to love God with all our hearts, souls, strengths, and mind is to love all of God's creation. May we claim stewardship and creation care as our response to the love of God and what it means to follow Jesus, redefining our neighbors to include our earth kin and the very planet itself. And may we be sources of life-giving, healing water for this world, else we become as extinct as the white rhino or as hopeless as the Dead Sea.